Em entrevista exclusiva a Raquel Crahenbowl, a primeira concedida a uma jornalista brasileira, Fauci falou sobre a importância da democracia para a saúde pública. Ele revelou que, nos Estados Unidos, morreram mais republicanos que democratas, porque muita gente do partido do então presidente Trump não se vacinou. Antony Fauci também disse acreditar que as mudanças climáticas vão ter impacto significativo no surgimento de novas doenças infecciosas e alertou: é certo que haverá uma nova pandemia.
Aos 83 anos, 54 deles dedicados à saúde pública, Antony Fauci trabalhou com 7 presidentes. Especialista em doenças infecciosas, enfrentou a epidemia de HIV e o vírus Ebola. Mas um de seus maiores desafios foi combater a Covid, ao lado de um presidente que chegou a sugerir injetar desinfetante em doentes.
This is just another example of a cartoon of Trump essentially trying to perform an operation, and here I am going like this. Oh my God, does he know what he's doing?
What comes to your mind when you look into this now?
Well, it just there was a very difficult time then because we were trying to give public health messages that would save people's lives, and we were not getting a lot of cooperation from the White House.
Vítima da polarização nos Estados Unidos e sofrendo ameaças da extrema-direita, Antony Fauci hoje está sempre acompanhado de seguranças do governo americano.
So everywhere you go, they go up behind you.
Everywhere I go, yeah.
And the government provided by the government,
Yeah.
and it's going to be by your side for.
Until they feel the threat is no longer present. And
Well, I'm glad that you're being, they're taking good care of you.
They are.
After everything you've done.
Right now, we live in a very, very unusual time where there's an extraordinary amount of divisiveness in our country. The divisiveness is characterized by hostility. I'm having security because I'm telling people they should get vaccinated. I'm telling them they should wear a mask. I'm telling them they should take care of themselves and protect themselves and their family from COVID. And there are elements in society who feel that that's an encroachment on their individual liberties. So instead of, disagreeing, they threaten with physical threats, with harassments, online, telephone, mail, but actually some true physical threats of violence against me. So it's really unfortunate that as a public health official, you have to have security.
Do you still get threats? Like 4 years later?
Do I still get threats? Of course. They know the address, telephone number of my daughters. They know my wife's telephone number. They certainly know mine. They know where I live. And they threaten. And then sometimes the threats become real. I mean, there have been at least 2 people that have been arrested who actually were trying to kill me. One was arrested with an AR-15 rifle in their car coming towards my house. He was arrested in another state accidentally. He got stopped at a stop sign, a traffic sign.
How much do you think everything is connected to disinformation, conspiracy theories? Because as you were trying to find scientific solutions for the pandemic, you are also in this battle against disinformation,
Right.
conspiracy theory. So how did that influence your ability to fight the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it was very detrimental to a proper public health response. If you look now in our society, there is so much disinformation is that most people can't figure out what the truth actually is because the disinformation is spread rampantly over social media. And some of the things that they say are so fantastic that it's almost ludicrous, but it isn't ludicrous because it's serious.
Dangerous.
Yeah, exactly.
While we were in the middle of the pandemic, we're also in the middle of a very heated presidential election
Right.
that ended up with the former president, Donald Trump, not accepting his defeat, and January 6th happened. Reflecting on your own experience, how much harder was it for you to do your job when democracy itself was under attack? So How important is democracy for public health?
It's critical because if you have a dissolution of democracy, you have a dissolution of the rule of law. And when society is not an ordered society where people can depend on being able to do their jobs without having threats, without having actually removal of truthful discourse among them, you can't get a cogent message to people. It is estimated by pretty good modeling that in the United States that approximately 200,000 people unnecessarily died of COVID because they refused to get vaccinated. And they refused to get vaccinated because there were ideological and political trends that were telling them they shouldn't get vaccinated. Do you know that more Republicans in the United States have died of COVID than Democrats, because many of the Republicans are anti-vaxxer, which is crazy that political ideology determines whether you're going to live or die. That's crazy. In the United States, if you look at the hospitalizations and deaths in those states that are predominantly Republican, red states, versus those states that are predominantly Democrat, blue states, the deaths of COVID is much, much greater in the red states. Why is that? Because they have less vaccinations.
Putting aside a little bit of the polarization and all of this aspect of your fight during the pandemic, for years now, looking back, I've seen you said a couple of times that things could have done better. You had the richest country having one of the highest mortality rate in the world. So how do you explain it? And what do you think you could have done better? Or, what were the mistakes here or lessons?
Well, I don't know if they were mistakes. There are several things. It's very, very complicated because we were dealing with a moving target. So this wasn't a disease that was well known. It peaked and it went down. As it evolved from the very beginning in January of 2020, the virus kept on evolving. Our knowledge and understanding of the virus changed as the months went by. If we had known in the very beginning what we knew a year into the outbreak, then we would have done better. But the other thing that I think was maybe peculiar to the United States, we have a great deal of disparity and fractionation of our healthcare delivery system. The healthcare delivery system in the United States is not uniformly distributed. People of lower socioeconomic status, minorities, African Americans, Hispanics, they have less access to healthcare, but they also have a higher level of underlying conditions that when you do get infected, it makes it more likely that you will have a serious outcome, such as hospitalization and death. We've had 1.17 million deaths from COVID in the United States, which is as bad or worse than any country in the world, including low and middle income countries.
The origin of the pandemic is still pretty much of an open question. And I know that recently in January, you were talking to members of Congress behind closed doors for like 7 hours, and this question came a lot. And there were reports that you said that you were open-minded on where the virus could have originated. Could you, what do you mean by that?
There are two theories. One that has a fair amount of evidence and one that has very little evidence, but they're still theories. One is that it was a natural occurrence, very much similar to other types of infection that jumps from a natural animal reservoir to a human and then spreads among humans. The other theory is that somewhere in China, people were working on a virus and they got infected, and it was a lab accident that then escaped from the lab. I keep an open mind that it could be either one or the other.
Do you think the world is better positioned now to deal with the next pandemic?
I look at it in two separate categories: the scientific approach and the public health approach. If you look at the scientific approach, we, the scientific community, did extremely well because we were able, because of the years of investment in basic and clinical biomedical research that go back decades before COVID, the investments in science allowed us to develop a vaccine in an unprecedented short period of time. So one lesson for the next pandemic is to continue to make investments in basic and clinical biomedical research. The other bucket, two buckets, scientific bucket, public health bucket. If you look at the public health bucket, that's all the things that I mentioned to you previously. We've got to make sure our public health infrastructure is nimble and able to respond. At least in the United States, we've got to make sure that we correct the fractionation of the healthcare delivery system. We've got to make sure we correct the disparities in healthcare among different individuals in the country. And hopefully, we don't have the profound degree of divisiveness that we had during this outbreak.
When you talk to the president, what are his biggest concerns nowadays? Is COVID still a concern, or what do you feel that is on his mind?
Well, I mean, COVID is still on his mind, but he has so many other things that are not health things on his mind. I mean, I can tell you from my experience with him, he's an incredibly competent person. I mean, very serious, very intent on details, on getting all the correct information. Every time I have briefed him, in many times over the 2 years that I was with him in the White House, he was really very sharp and very attentive to listening to the facts. He always wanted to get the facts, and he always wanted good explanations for things, which was very pleasant to work with.
Very different than the previous president.
Yeah.
And what keeps you up at night when you think about the future of public health or disease?
Yeah.
Well,
years ago, many people would ask me the same question you just asked me. They would say, Dr. Fauci, what keeps you up at night? Or what is your worst nightmare? And I have said consistently, would be the evolution of a brand new virus that likely jumps from an animal host to a human, that's respiratory borne, that has a high degree of morbidity and mortality. And unfortunately for me and for the world, that's exactly what happened with COVID. Now you're asking me the same question 4 years later, and I could say the same thing keeps me up at night. A brand new infection transmitted by the respiratory route,
similar to COVID,
that has the high degree of morbidity and mortality. It could be a new influenza, it could be another coronavirus, or it could be yet again another respiratory virus that we don't know about. But the greatest threat is something that has a high degree of morbidity and mortality, and that can easily spread from one person to another. And the easiest way for a pathogen, particularly a virus, to spread from one person to another is through the respiratory route. That's exactly what happened with COVID. Prior to COVID, the worst killer pandemic civilization has experienced was the pandemic of 1918, which killed 50 to 100 million people in 1918 at a time when the population of the world was 1/3 the size of what it is now. Fast forward 100 years and you have COVID, which is very similar. In the United States, we've never had except for the 1918 pandemic. We've never had a pandemic that has killed so many people.
Could you make a prediction, like when do you think could happen? Especially like, for example, if you take into consideration climate change.
Right.
How climate change can impact, these scenarios?
Sure. Climate change unquestionably will have an impact on the emerging of new infectious diseases, whether they are vector-borne to allow mosquitoes to have a greater range. Mosquitoes are in Brazil, mosquitoes are in Africa, and they are limited by the climate. When you get a little bit warming climate, the mosquitoes hang around longer, you get the greater, right now, South America and Brazil is facing a really serious issue of vector-borne infections. So we want to make sure that doesn't expand itself. Climate change increases a little bit the level of water. When you get flooding, you get more infectious diseases. So we can't predict when the next outbreak that's a pandemic will occur, but we can be pretty sure it will happen. So you have to ask me, how can you be so sure? Well, history tells us that. The thing we don't know is, can we predict when the next big outbreak? There will be little outbreaks that go along all the time, but when will be the next transforming outbreak? We don't know. Will it be 5 years from now, 10 years, next year, 50 years? It's impossible to tell, but we know it will happen.
So going back to the climate change, because you mentioned Brazil.
Yeah.
Brazil have a very serious dengue outbreak right now. So how worried should we be and what can be done?
Well, there are two things when you have a mosquito-borne outbreak like dengue. One is mosquito control. That can be very effective if you put a lot of effort into mosquito control, larvicides, sprays, all the things you can do to prevent mosquitoes. The good news on the horizon is that a very successful new dengue vaccine has just been shown to be quite effective. And in fact, there's a company in the Butantan in Brazil that has worked with that vaccine for some time now. So I'm optimistic that in the future, that vaccine would be very beneficial to Brazil to protect its citizens against dengue.
In Brazil, have a long and celebrated history of federal government conducting very successful mass vaccination. Do you think the U.S. could learn something from Brazil or work together in that field?
Well, yeah, Brazil has, as you said, has done very well in federally conducted vaccine. I think countries can learn from each other. I think Brazil can learn some things from the United States, and we certainly can learn some things from Brazil.
From your interactions with the scientific community there, do you believe Brazil is well positioned for the future when it comes to scientific research and public health?
Brazil has very good scientists. In fact, I've had scientists from Brazil who've been in my laboratory. We've had people that have been in the NIH who were from Brazil and then went back to Brazil. Brazil has some quite good scientists in the field of infectious. They have good scientists in all disciplines, but in the field of infectious diseases, when it comes to dengue, when it comes to HIV, when it comes to other diseases of tropical nature, Brazil has very good scientists.
So do you think Brazil could help maybe
of course.
In the next pandemic?
Oh, sure. I would hope that. It's a big country, 215 million people in Brazil, right?
Looking back, do you have any regrets?
No, I don't think they be called regrets. You always, when you look back at a long career, there are always things you feel you could have done better. I think that's a healthy way to look at your life. Because if you think you did everything perfectly, then you were probably being unrealistic, because nobody does everything perfectly. But I don't have any major regrets for things that I've done. I've been very fortunate. I've had the opportunity by a combination of things to be right in the middle of the eye of the hurricane of major outbreaks of HIV, of Ebola, of Zika, of influenza, and now of COVID. So I've been at the right place at the right time, and I've had the opportunity, because of my position, to make contributions.
What is next for you?
I spent the last part of a year working very hard on my memoir. What I'm doing now is I'm teaching in this wonderful university, and I'm a distinguished university professor in 2 schools, in the School of Medicine and in the School of Public Policy. So what I'm planning to do over the next couple of years is to essentially merge the scientific aspects with the policy aspects and do a lot of teaching and seminars for the young people on campus, because I really feel at my age, 83, what I have left to contribute is to hopefully inspire young people who might decide they might want to go into public service or into science. So if they see me as a model, I don't think I'm going to convince everybody to do that, but maybe a few people, you could convince them and inspire them and be a model for them to go into public service.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fauci. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.